Hello and welcome to the Gifted Podcast. I am your host Niraj Mulani, and in the Gifted Podcast, I speak with elite athletes as we try to challenge the misconception that athletes are just some people who are talented or gifted with special abilities at birth. Every week, I am joined by an elite athlete as we try to break down what it truly takes and means to be an athlete. If you're an aspiring athlete or just a casual sports fan, you will definitely enjoy this podcast as I get candid with athletes about their journey, their achievements, moments of heartbreak, and most importantly, moments of hard work and perseverance. Guys, I'm happy to share that the Gifted Podcast is now sponsored by Zenkai Sports, the new disruptor in the performance apparel world. And they have come up with a great offer for the listeners of this podcast. So, stick around till the end and find out about this exciting offer. In today's episode, I welcome Olympian Siona Fernandes. Siona is of Indian origin and represented New Zealand at the London Olympics in the sport of boxing. Siona and I discuss what it was like growing up in Goa while playing multiple sports and also how her dancing career of 17 years helped her with boxing. Siona reflects on moving to New Zealand at the age of 24, picking up boxing up at 27, and taking the boxing world by storm as she rose to world number 11 within a year. So, let's jump right in. Welcome, Siona, to the Gifted Podcast today. We're really thrilled to have you. How are you doing today?
Had a great Friday, so it's the end of my weekend. So in one way tired, but in the other way refreshed. So thank you. How about yourself?
All good. Just looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have. Really excited to know more about your journey to the Olympics and more. So let's start right at the beginning because I do love to talk about the early stages of the making of an athlete. So what was it like growing up in Goa, and what would you say were the early influences that you believe set the foundation for your sporting career?
Before I actually start answering your question, I really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I want to commend the kind of work that you're doing, which I think is amazing. So yeah, that's awesome. And thanks for having me here. Looking forward to having this conversation with you as well, Niraj. Regarding the question, the early influences for development in Olympic sport, I say would come down to my school years. When I think about it in hindsight, it's always the kind of exposure I had in sport, not necessarily just sport as in basketball or tennis, but also when I look at it as movement through dancing. And I think I had a really good exposure to both these skill sets at a very young age, which today I can talk about it now, saying that hang on, boxing really is a combination of both. You know, it's that sporting drive and the idea of competition in sport and winning and losing and, and teamwork and all that jazz. But then it was also a combination of footwork and movement and balance, which I got from dancing. And I think the two of them meshed together quite well in my early developmental years.
Right. So even in our previous call, you have been a big advocate of playing multiple sports and being involved in various activities while growing up and not specializing in one sport too early. What all sports and activities did you partake in as a child, and how do you think they became a major factor in you becoming an elite athlete?
Right. So let's start with your first part of the question. Number of sports and everything that I participated in would be, so basketball was big growing up, tennis, table tennis, athletics, that would be javelin, shot put, discus. Thinking about all the certificates I collected now. And what else did I do? I did karate for a while. I remember doing, breaking the brick with your fist. So I did all those demonstrations and the katas and the nunchucks. So yeah, definitely did all of that. And then on the other side, even though this is not a sport, but I was a part of a violin group as well through Kala Academy, which is a big academy in Goa for music and dance. And that's the same place where I pursued my 9-year training career in dancing, Bharatanatyam, which is like an Indian traditional dance.
Right.
Yeah. What's the second part of your question? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I was trying to understand what all of these activities actually helped you become the athlete that you are today and how.
Well, you see, I don't think I can pick one and say, hey, guess what? Because I did this sport, it has actually transferred into me being an Olympian or in boxing. I think it's a combination of everything. And I'm not a neuropsychologist or anything like that or a scientist, but I would say it's a combination of skills that sort of develop all the qualities required for that particular sport, which is endurance, movement, um, from the physical side. But there's also a mental element, I think, to when you're talking about elite sport. I think there's a mental element to it. For example, let's start with the basics like discipline, showing up every day, doing the hard yards, enduring, being resilient, not just in the physical sense of the body, being resilient to injuries, but also the mind being resilient to defeat
Yeah.
and being resilient to the no-show days or I don't feel very good days, and training your brain through that. I think that was very well developed for me when I was growing up through these different avenues. Like training in dancing, for instance, comes to me very clearly because it's not easy to do Bharatanatyam. It takes a lot of repetition, a lot of practice, and you're doing the same movement over and over and over again for years of not 9 years training. You start with the first what we call ado, which is the first sort of like the ABC of the movement. Every single time you start dancing for 9 years, and to me that is was what I think resembles very much the boxing training because when you're warming up, you're still throwing that first jab, you're still throwing that first basic punch over and over and perfecting it over and over again, which is not just a physical 10,000 hours that you're doing, the whole 10,000 hours to greatness or to learning a skill. It's not just the physical, but you're also training your mind, your mental muscle to endure that, to endure the pain, to stay focused on what you're looking for. You're training that concentration, that mental capacity. You're actually building that. And for me, I think it started very early through this environment. It's the same with violin, keeping the focus on what you're playing, showing up before even playing, showing up to the session, even if you have a bad day, or I think with sport very early, it definitely gave me the taste of winning and losing and what that felt, and I did it as a team. I did it in basketball, being selected in a team, not being selected in a team. That I think really starts to give you the taste of what competition is at an elite level, but at a very young age.
Right. And at the age of 7, you actually started training as a performing artist in Indian classical dance of Bharatanatyam, and you also graduated with a bachelor's in performing arts and were in fact awarded the National Scholarship for Advanced Dance Studies. And during all this, you also represented Goa in state level basketball in 1998. How were you juggling such a unique combination of classical dance and sports at the same time? And what was the teenage Siona aspiring for at that time?
I'm glad you researched just the just the sport and not the academic grades. Something's got to give at some point, right? Well, let me put it this way: I wasn't a failure in any of my classes, and I got through my grades straight through school. But I think as a child, yeah, I think during my childhood, I was really caught up with sport and really interested in learning all these kind of skills as opposed to putting 100% focus only on getting the first rank. And that's what we have in India. We have ranks like rank 1 to trying to come up with the first 10 in my class. I think the philosophy that I had growing up, and I can only say that today, yeah? I wouldn't be able to put this together, string a sentence together on this question if you asked me then. But in hindsight, I think my philosophy was just enjoy the opportunity of learning all these different skills and also do well in education. I don't think I was 100%, to be honest. I wasn't 100% seeking to be the top 10 in my class. But I certainly wasn't someone who would not study as well. I would definitely focus on my education. But when it comes to juggling, I would prioritize, I think from a very young age, knowing what's important when. When there were board exams coming up, a lot of these activities would definitely be pulled back. And I think there was a lot of support around that, that it came from teachers, family, friends, even institutions and organizations would understand that. So that really helps. And when there wasn't any examination around the corner or something like that, then it was full swing sport or, everyday, whatever, dance or whatever it is that I needed to do every day. But a typical day would probably look like wake up in the morning, catch the school bus, we go to school. The first thing we start is at 7 a.m. on the basketball court. We'd all be playing basketball as a team, get trained by the coach. We start the class. I'd always be late for the first class, but I'd be there in school, but never on time. But I'm there. And then you have a full school day. And as soon as school was over, I would go to Kala Academy, which is, another institute away from school, get dropped off there, do what I needed to do. So I'd have dance on one day and I had violin on the other, dance on one day. And we used to alternate that way because it's in the same place. And then go home, have dinner, little bit of study, do the little bit of homework, and go to bed. And that to me was, in hindsight, like today, I wouldn't have changed that for anything. I think just being only focused on education at that point would have probably given me a different pathway to experience today. But because I didn't only focus on studies at that point and decided to take up sport, I think at a very young age, I was exposed to what I really enjoyed doing and also had a taste of what I was good at. I knew I was good at sport because I had a natural passion for it and I was always drawn to it. And these are the things that you don't realize when you're young. But as you start to develop, mentally and even physically through movement patterns, you start to realize that you're actually good at this. And sometimes taking up what you're good at is also important as you get older, and to excel at something. So I think, so that's kind of what it looked like. So studies was not always an A grade, but I certainly got through my grades and I think I did really well in school. So that's probably it. Yeah.
And your success as a dancer then saw you move to Bangalore, India, and become a disciple of Guru M.R. Krishnamurti. And then you also made your debut public performance after 17 years of training. It will be interesting to juxtapose this, your training as a dancer, to the athlete in you. But before I get there, I'm actually curious to understand what that training did for you as an individual. What values and learnings did you take from training as a dancer and into your daily life?
Actually, Niraj, if you don't mind me, I'm still sort of pondering on the question that you said before, which was what was I actually aspiring to do with all of that, right? Growing up. And I think deep inside, I was aspiring to be the best version of myself in the moment on the day at that time. I don't think I was aspiring to compete with anybody. I think the only person I really wanted to compete with at that time was myself. Like, how can I do the best thing I can today? Today's basketball. Let's go and do the best I can. Let's run the fastest. So let's aim for this. Let's try and convert that. And I'd show up because that was really my passion and my motivation. And I think that's what I was aspiring to.
Okay.
At a very young age. It was not a competition like I want to be number one or I want to be there. But I also had a little bit of that, but it was not something I was focused on solely. I think I just wanted to do the best I could. Now, coming on to your question, sorry, you're going to have to repeat that again. Yeah.
So I was talking about your success as a dancer, then saw you move to Bangalore and you became a disciple of Guru M.R. Krishnamurti and made your debut public performance after 17 years of training. I want to juxtapose this training as a dancer to you becoming an athlete. But before I get there, I'm also curious to understand how and what this training did for you as an individual before we talk about what it did for you as an athlete.
Well, there's so many things I can think on different levels there. Once again, from the physical side, dancing is quite a robust, and I think classical Indian dancing is like boxing on a very cultural level, which you need strength, you need endurance, you need all kinds of qualities, which are very demanding. On a mental level, it's the same thing. It's the act of discipline. It's training the quality of discipline. It's doing the same thing over and over again. It's also, I think it was something that was very grounding to my culture and understanding what it was for the background that I came for, like in Goa, to do something that's a very Indian classical art, to take something like that up. So I think Indian classical dancing has taught me not just the importance of physicality, but it was almost a sort of a meditation. It's how to connect and be present in that one state of mind when you're doing something, which you don't often get today. And I found that I think that transferred very strongly into boxing. And I started falling in love with the challenges of both. There is a lot of challenge to dancing, and I think I like that. I'm quite drawn to the idea of being challenged. If something comes easy, I go, oh, what's the hard way out? I'm like, all right, let's try that. Maybe you learn something more about yourself. You know, there's one thing I realized in both these disciplines is that they're equally challenging physically and mentally. And I'm definitely drawn to that.
Right. And you moved to New Zealand in 2006 and joined the army in 2008. How did that move come about all of a sudden?
I hope I was thinking right at that time, to be honest. Yep. So the army, yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it? So I think it was just bouncing off the idea of challenge itself. So I moved to New Zealand and I see this advertisement for the army, and I question myself and I go, oh, what if I did join the army? Let me just apply. Like, I've never really experienced something like this before, and I'm trying to figure it out. What could it be? I mean, I couldn't really conjure up what the idea of being in the army would actually feel like. What is it? I mean, you see it on TV, but it's just a visual. You can't really conjure up what it really felt like. And I said, well, let's try it. Yeah, let's try it. So I looked into it and I said, okay, let me just apply. I applied, and I remember telling my dad, and my dad's like, what? Did you just sign up yourself? And I'm like, yeah, I totally did. And he's like, okay, that sounds good. And my mom was totally against it, as probably all Indian moms are. So my dad was like, go for it. And so I went in there, and by far, it was one of the best experiences of my life, I would say, hands down, and not often spoken about, I think, in terms and the shadow of my boxing highlights.
Right.
And I think there's a lot that I've learned in being in the army. Yeah, for sure. So I was driven by the idea of challenge. Yeah.
I think this is a constant theme of you wanting to try and challenge yourself and test your limits. And being in the army for 2 years, and then you decided to actually pursue a career in amateur boxing. I wanted to understand, having had so much exposure and experience in different sports, especially basketball, or was even dancing a consideration at that time when you decided to quit army in 2010 and pursue a career in boxing?
Okay, so right. So, of course, doing the dancing was in India. And when you move to New Zealand, I think having that style, because I was doing a Kalakshetra style of dancing, which is quite rare to find outside of India. And so when I moved to New Zealand, you try and look for the same sort of style of dancing or a same sort of a guru, which is very hard to find.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, since I don't have dancing, but I was so, it was a part of my genes. It was like a part of my breath, growing up at 7, where you're not just studying, but you have all these different things going on in your life. And at 24, it's all just taken away from you, like just gone. It's changed to a different environment. It was a massive shock for me. It's like, okay, now what? Like, what do I do? I have no idea. I was totally thrown in the unknown. It was completely an unknown space for me. I don't know what was going to go on with my life. And I definitely found the army being another opportunity, boxing being another opportunity that I could test those ingredients that I'm used to, like the challenge, the need for discipline. I think I'm just drawn to things that make you become like that as part of the process. Forget about the outcome. It's not about the outcome, but I think it's the ingredients. What are you becoming enduring the process? is what I was drawn to. And when I went to the army and signed up for it, they have it in phases. So when they train a soldier or train anybody to be a soldier, they have it in phases. So the first phase is you do a weekend on the army base, and then you do another weekend, then you do weeks at a time, and then you're pretty much about a month, training. And you can break that down as across whatever time span you wanted. But for me, I just did it from start right up to the end. I didn't want to break it out. I said, I'm going to sign up today and I'm going to come out the day I actually sort of, what they say, like a graduation, where you actually become a soldier and you have your beret on and stuff like that. And that itself was a huge learning experience, and I think that was something I was looking forward to moving into New Zealand. And because I didn't have the dancing in India, I took up boxing and I just tried it. I just walked into a gym, and at that time, we didn't have the concept of gym very strongly. When I was growing up in India, I think it's a lot more gym culture happening now. Yeah. But when I was growing up in India, there wasn't a lot of gym culture, let alone trying to find a boxing gym. So when I moved here, I walked into a boxing gym and I saw all these people doing stuff on the bag, and I had never seen the sport in front of me like that, so close to me. I said, well, let me try it. And so I jumped in there, put the gloves on, and we just go jab cross. And I started whacking that bag. And someone's like, who is that? She's so crazy on the bag, because I was going full swing on it. And, they knew I was a bit of an Indian girl and things like that. So they're like, started talking to me, and the guy was like, why don't you train in it? And I said, well, let's start training. But while I was training, that's when the layers were peeling off. And I said, hang on, this is similar to dance. What's similar? The challenge. It's not easy. And I was drawn to that. Let's look at the next ingredient. Okay, this is similar to dance. What is that? Discipline. If you want to take this sport up, you've got to train your heart out. Which means you show up every day, and it's not easy because your body hurts, your hand hurts, your wrist hurts. Everything needs to be conditioned to a different sport. So I didn't look at it as a bad thing. To me, by this time, when I was 24, I think I was around 24, I was like, at this time, at this age, this is exactly what I was looking for, because this is exactly what I was trained to do all my life. The only difference was it's boxing. Hey. But the ingredients of that recipe in the making were the same. So I was naturally drawn to it. And of course, boxing is one of those sports which I personally think is very meditative in nature, because there's so much focus on what you're doing. You can't think of anything else. You're so focused on it. It really sharpens your concentration, which is very similar to when you're doing dancing.
Right.
So I think for me, it was very much the same sort of ingredients of the recipe, but just in two different countries, in two different contexts.
And this is 2010, so you were 27 and you decided to start your journey as an athlete. So some would say, not me, but I'm sure there would have been others that said it is relatively a little late to start your journey as an athlete, especially in such a physically demanding sport as boxing. Were there ever doubts in your mind or from your family members when you're starting out that this may be a little too late for you to start this journey?
Never. Not in my mind. And lucky enough for me, not in the minds of the people that pushed me to do it. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is, of course, it takes two things. It takes self-belief, but I think it takes a really good team of people pushing you through. Right. And for me, the team of people were not necessarily my family. They were not exactly supportive of my boxing career, but they didn't stop me from doing it either. I don't think they were well aware of what the sport could be as well. So, but the people I was with were people who recognized that talent and who pushed me forward to getting better at it without any sort of pressure to perform. And I think that made a big difference to me, because it aligned with my idea of having fun and being the best that I could be on the day and all that jazz. But it was an environment that just allowed me to grow in my own way. So I was really lucky to be surrounded by those kind of people who nurtured talent
Yeah.
and see where that went. And of course, that was the starting bit. Okay, that was the starting bit. And then, of course, when you do perform well, and then, like, let me backtrack here and say, what was my first experience when I did a sparring session? So when you start boxing, you learn you may look really great on the pads and on the bag, but when someone punches you back, it's not dancing anymore. This is real. You get punched back. So like, well, guess what? That's what really happens in the ring. And the first time I experienced that, I remember coming home, sitting outside at the bottom of the building and crying endlessly for a good 40 minutes before I picked up the phone and called my friend. I said, did you ever feel this way? Did you ever feel this way? Like you feel terrible. You just got beaten up, in the ring. And he's like, yeah, of course you do, because that's how you start. And I cried my eyes out. But the next day I wanted to do that again. And the next time I did that again and again and again, I didn't cry. And I started getting better at moving in the ring. And so obviously that's personally, you might think, yeah, that's my age, but I'm developing in this sport and I'm developing the qualities required to get better at this sport, as opposed to leaning back and saying, oh, I cry, maybe it's my age, maybe I'm too old for this sport, and you give up. And I think I've faced a lot of failure. I have faced a lot of failure. My success story in boxing is not about getting gold medals. But I think my success story in boxing, and the success, by success I mean the meaning I give to success, is not about gold medals, but it's about someone really believing in themselves through the grind and learning not just boxing, but a whole bunch of different qualities that you can become as part of the journey. And I'm sure you yourself, Niraj, are experiencing that in your own sport of pistol shooting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the outcome, right? It's that belief that you mold and you develop and you experience through adversity, through success, through the wins, through the failures, through the pushback, through people who believe in you, and through people who don't want to believe in you. And I think you get a mix of all these kind of attitudes when you start getting into sport, or you start pushing yourself into these zones
Right.
of experiences. And I'm a big believer in, guess what? You better go push yourself into a zone and see how you come up on the other side. Because the worst thing for me to live with is not knowing what the outcome of what I could do is going to be.
Absolutely.
And to me, age doesn't cut it. It's not a strong excuse. It's not strong enough to take away the belief I have molded. I wasn't born with this, but to take away the belief that I have molded through these different experiences, but also through the teams that you're surrounded with.
Right.
And I think I till today, actually, was it yesterday or a couple of days ago, my boxing coach, his name's Chris Martin, and he's from New Zealand, and he still keeps in touch with me, and we still talk, about the new struggles that I'm going through now that I'm doing my PhD. I said, this is so not boxing. This is such a different environment. But again, it's pushing me into another zone, and I'm becoming and molding myself through different experiences. But those are the experiences that I've learned in sport that help me better myself in a newer situation. And I don't think there's an age excuse. Good try, Niraj, good try, but that's not going to work. The age bar doesn't go nowhere.
That's very reassuring for me as somebody who is starting out their journey as an athlete as well. So
Yeah.
Thank you for dishelving that misconception. And I think you also had the performances to back that statement, and you took the women's boxing world by storm, rising to world number 11 in the flyweight category within a year of starting boxing. And you're also being called the most scientific of the elite fighters. How did this title come about, and how do you think all those years of dancing actually helped you, rise to the top of the world women's fighting?
Okay, so there's two parts of your question there. So how did the title help me come up, and how did dancing help me rise up? Okay.
There would be some factors of dance training also contributing to you being a scientific fighter amongst all the elite women athletes. So That's what I was trying to understand.
Yeah, right. So when it comes to, let me go back to how did you come up the rankings? I think one of the things I always look back on with my boxing career, I was never beaten up. I may have lost, but I was never beaten up. And everyone looks at my face and they go, "Are you sure you're a boxer?" And I'm like, "Oh, 100%." They're like, "You sure that's a natural nose?" I'm like, "100%. Trust me, it doesn't get flattened out. It's still there." And I think the reason for that is I've always been trained with hard fighters. I was never really been given the easy way out. Never. Even when I had my first fight, it was against the New Zealand champ. And when I had, that was my first ever fight. Like, I didn't even throw a punch in my life. But this woman's thrown God knows how many punches. But I was chucked in with them. So the worst that you can become is the best of the other person. So the best sword kind of sharpens your edges. And I really think of that today. The Even if it's the worst version of me in a boxer, it's still better than the most people out there. And I think when you put yourself, the second or the third fight I had ever in my life was against an Australian. It was an international fight. And I was really chucked into these real deep, hard pools, which really strengthened me. And I think when it came to the world level and things like that, you do get that experience behind you and you rise up. And it's not always easy, but you do rise up. And so I think I rose up pretty quickly with a combination of whatever it takes physically, mentally, emotionally, to also facing the tough opponents straight away and moving up. The second part is how did the dancing sort of tweak into the scientific boxer. So I think that award is more about the skills and how you demonstrate the skills in boxing in an actual fight situation. And I think for me, that really came out because the dance background brings out a certain side of grace to a very, what most people would look at, aggressive, powerful, manly kind of a movement or a sport. But I think I would move, and I take great pride in that, with a lot of grace, even though I'm hitting quite fast and quite strong for my weight division. So I think that flow of movement, that sort of rhythm, that sort of grace, demonstrating a very manly, aggressive, sporting skill, I think is definitely inspired through my dancing, which came through. That was during the nationals. That was during a national competition where they have the actual nationals and they pick out the most scientific boxer during that tournament. So I think that definitely came through. Yeah.
And after that incredible first year, you actually went on and had another incredible year qualifying for the London Olympics, where women's boxing was actually being introduced for the first time. Talk me through your qualification and the feeling of having qualified for the Olympics.
The feeling of qualifying for the Olympics. I don't know what's the right word for excited, disbelief, excited, as well as really nervous. I think that's when the first bell rang off in my head, thinking, "Damn, this is game on. There's no fun in this anymore in a way because it's time for performance, you know?" And all those years growing up where life was just about having fun, being the best I can be on that version of the day and all that, suddenly changed. It's definitely a switch. But hearing the news of qualifying for something, I'm sure anybody would be over the moon. Anybody would be over the moon. I was really excited. I was like, this is almost impossible. There's no way. I mean, how can this even happen? You know, you have all these things, questions in your mind. And I actually was with a boxer at that time when I actually got the news. He was like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is crazy." So, but that I think that's where the pressure does kick in a little bit because now you've just taken a leap into elite sport, you know, and everything that you do before just takes on to the power of 10 or 100, a lot more seriousness, a lot more dedication, a lot more narrowing of any other distractions. You know, like I may not have the time to run a business. I may not have the time or, you know, to look after a lot of other things. So there's a lot more pressure in that sense. You've got to narrow down the other distractions in your life. So yeah, so certainly it was something that I accepted very willingly, with tears, with nervousness, with also I think you experience all the emotions you ever experience at one go, to be honest. But it's something it's something I cherish so much. You have no idea. And I think it's not about the sport necessarily, like I said, and it's also not about making. It is about making the Olympics, but I think it's knowing the amount of hard work really does pay off,
Yeah.
one way or the other. And I think that's the most important thing for me. That's what I felt at that time. It wasn't, oh, I'm going to the Olympics. It was, yeah, it is the Olympics, but it's all that hard work that gets you to that point.
Right.
And that's what sunk in massively for me. Yeah.
And all in a time, just 2 years of picking up the sport. So massive kudos.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So going into the Olympics, what sort of targets and ambitions did you set for yourself, and how did you start your training physically and more importantly mentally for those targets?
Right. Okay. So I think, yeah, like I said, when you're sort of aiming for, you're not competing with national level. So you're at an international level. So your mind automatically thinks global, thinks who's next, what could be the next, who else could I face, who else is in my league, what did they have, what don't they have, what do they, what do I need, what do I lack? And I think identifying the weaknesses become a lot more valuable, because not every opponent is going to be the one you want. It's like it's completely a different ball game, and just a different recipe. And you've got to have the right tools and the right ingredients to face what you have, or at least try. You may not always win, but you've got to do your homework well enough to prepare yourself for the journey that's ahead. So physically, obviously, that's where things change a little bit. You start to get a little bit serious with the kind of trainers you pick, what you're training for, the level of trainers. You start to see where you're at. The testing becomes a lot more. There's a measurement tool, what before or after, where you're starting, where you're at, what are the improvements. The fitness levels get tested a lot more psychologically, and I think this is where the team is a big a big influence on this next level of the kind of training you get. Mentally, I think for me personally, I really didn't have a lot of. I think of some of the countries. I'm going to be quite honest with you in this one. Some of the countries have a lot more. From what I understand, I don't know a lot about the management about these things, but from what I understand, a lot of the countries have psychologists or people who really help them through as part of their training, their everyday training, which is great. Well, I wasn't really given all those opportunities, or this, to me, it was a luxury. But I think a little bit for me, what I learned through boxing in the realities of it, like go, face, lose, now what? It's like, right, I think I need to do something here, right? So I learned the hard way. I always learned the hard way. And I was lucky to get mentors to help me through that journey with a few tips and tricks to learn through that. Mentally, I've always had the habit of journaling.
Yeah.
And it's funny how a lot of people say, hang on, but a lot of people do visualizing for sport. It's very common sort of a technique where you visualize the whole thing, you walk yourself through it, you talk yourself through it, you actually see the situation, da 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 da. For me, I actually resorted to journaling. I wrote about my feelings, my thoughts around my performances. I always identify. Can I actually say this, or this is rambling on too long?
No,
Can I share this?
Really helpful.
You
Yeah.
sure? Yeah, because I don't want to say like, oh my gosh, who's going to listen to this? It's like, this is becoming a psychology lesson. It's like, we don't want this. All right. So for me, I think I always try and identify emotion and thought. And I still do that today. And these are the strategies I use even now when I'm studying or when I'm working or whatever. So I always journal, what is the emotion? What am I feeling? Am I happy with my performance? Am I sad? Am I angry? I just wanted to, what was I? What was I in the ring? Who was in the ring? And I would identify the emotion. Then I would identify the thought. What am I thinking? What was I thinking? So I was sad. So what did I think? Oh, I'm never gonna make it. Oh, I'm really upset with myself. Oh, I'm never gonna get out of this. Or was I sad, but I was thinking positive? I'm sad, but I know I'm going to get myself back. What was I saying to myself? So these are the things I would identify. And if there was a mismatch, I would try and fit a solution or a strategy to say that there is a match that is positive for my performance. And then I would use visualization. So that's how I would use what I know in my psychology, my little psychology background into my day-to-day life. And I did that in sport, and I even do that today when I'm doing my PhD. So it's like identify the emotion. Well, I'm feeling really happy with my performance. Great. What am I telling myself in the fight? What am I telling myself outside the fight? Like when I'm, sort of assessing my performance. Oh, I really like what I did. I think this is great. I could use a little bit more. I could take a day off. I could enjoy a week off because I've really worked hard. And then I act on it. Or I was really upset with my performance, and I identified in my mind that it was really bringing me down. I was feeling a little bit negative. Then I'd say, what do I need to do to make myself feel positive and to change the emotion, because the emotion is triggering the thought. So for me, the journaling aspect really, really helps me. And then once I have the formula, then I would visualize the formula. So I'm in the ring. Right, I'm not going to I have to target the sadness. So I have to make sure I do enough, I say enough, I feel enough, I think enough, I use the self-talk, I use music therapy that actually trigger those positive emotions, not the negative ones, because music can do both. Yep. It can trigger the aggression. So if I feel, hang on, I lost this fight because I was really waiting for that one opportunity to do something, and I was angry. Every time she hits me, I was angry. I would identify that emotion. She hit me, I'm angry. So what do I need to do next time? Wait for my opportunity. So what should I do to calm that energy? I need something that calms me before I get in there. So I'd identify these things, I'd visualize, I'd practice my next sparring session with this emotion in mind, and catch myself out if I'm starting to just get angry and hit back. Okay? As opposed to I hit her when I was relaxed. So I would put that in training.
Right.
And then visualize, practice, visualize. That's the kind of thing. I don't know if this is making sense to you.
This is really helpful, because I was actually trying to understand how would one train mentally and such an intangible aspect, because especially in a sport like boxing, the physiological elements don't come across as a differentiator, and a lot of the athletes will need to rely on their mental training. And how would one try and train such an intangible aspect? So this is really helpful. So thank you for sharing that. I definitely would want to also give this a shot for my own journaling aspect. And coming to the Olympics, actually, and you placed ninth overall. What was your feeling at that time, and how did you rate your performance? And I do like to understand this from the athlete themselves, because their idea of success is what's important when we are trying to review their performance. And I don't really like to read what the press says about their performance, what different kinds of external pressures were on them while they were at the Olympics, but just trying to understand how you rated your performance.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I consider before I rate myself on anything. And I think one thing being, where did I start from? That's something I take it in any situation, even in the PhD. What tools did I have? Where am I at with the tools that I had? Is that important? That would determine the way I would interpret the outcome,
right,
from my performance. Because all of us, but I realize, at least in my world, Niraj, in my reality, I wasn't born, I'm not a daughter of a great boxer, or I wasn't born with, 10 years of boxing training, or any of the luxuries.
Yeah.
So, or any kind of support, even financially or anything. So it was really tough. So I considered that, because in my setting, this is all I had.
Absolutely.
This is all I had. And I may have had somebody from a local gym help me through, while somebody else may have had the next best coach that's out there. But that's what I had, and I give a lot of value to that.
Yeah.
I give a lot of value to that. And then I look at my performance at the end, and I also look at, if I lose, I never look at it as a bad thing, depending on how I performed and depending on who I lost against.
Yeah.
And that is really important for me. I lost against Bulgaria, and she was, I think, the European champion at that time. So for me, I was excited to get an opponent like her, because where else will I get her? It's not like, coming from New Zealand, which is one of those little countries in boxing, you don't really get chances to go to Europe where you're funded and you can easily fight these people all the time. So for me, this is a great opportunity. And for me, also not being in the sport for too long, I don't think I took it on as having any additional pressure to perform. For me, it was, I have nothing to lose and only every single moment to gain from the environment, the occasion, the event, and the opponent. So I really tick those boxes of having fun, doing what needs to be done in all seriousness, and perform to the best as you possibly can, and cherish every single moment. So coming back to the toolkits that I had, so obviously at the Olympics, I didn't have the coach I was working with. So my actual boxing coach was in New Zealand, while you are replaced with a national coach who doesn't necessarily know your style of functioning or movement. So the kind of the kind of eyes that you get from the corner are not necessarily something that you're used to.
Right.
But you got to work with it, And it was. I mean, I'm getting a little. It's a little political at this point, to be quite honest, when it comes to elite level sport, at least from what I understand. That yeah, I wasn't really given a lot of support in this 3-month journey or pathway towards the actual games. And so obviously, given the tools that I had, starting with the sport, the kind of knowledge, skills, the people I work with, all the way to the end of my performance, who I fought against, did I do my country proud? Did I get beaten up? That's the first thing I always look at. Did I get beaten up? No. And I thought I did really well against a European champion. Yeah, that. I was really happy with my performance. There are performances where I weren't happy, but that was very much in the start of my career. But I think when it came to the Olympic Games, fighting against the European champion, who probably had 4 times more the number of fights than I could possibly think of having, I was really pleased with that performance. Yeah.
Right. And now, looking back on your boxing career, what individual traits and values did you rely on most to help you along the way?
Along the way in sport, like boxing,
Yeah.
what values help me along? Self-belief, number one. Self-belief, because honestly, I think I could answer that question. I wouldn't have been able to answer that question so much during the actual journey, but I think it's now, in hindsight, when you're pushed into, maybe academia or the next challenge in life ahead, you just realize, hang on, I'm so much stronger at this. Why? Oh yeah, that's right. It's because I did the sport and all the experiences that come along with it. And self-belief is huge. The courage to be the version that you want to be. To fight the fight, to learn the game in the style that you bring. Don't let anyone change that about you. You shouldn't be fitting a particular box. You bring, I believe each of us bring our own style to anything we do. So I think having the belief and the courage to believe and to do what you believe in is really, really important. And I think that has taken me through a lot in boxing. For me, it was, like I said, it was not about the gold medals. It was not about the outcome at all. Because it wasn't such a long, so many years of my life.
Yep.
But it was definitely about the qualities that I've learned, which is the belief, the courage, the teamwork, which I think is massive. Whether it's a good experience or a bad experience, teamwork matters. The teams matter, and those values are really, really important. Yeah, for me.
And in our previous conversations and also in the interviews that I came across, you have been a big advocate of solitude and spirituality. Could you share how those factors have contributed towards your personality as an athlete as well as an individual?
So that solidarity and spirituality, yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm still pondering on your previous question, so you might have to repeat this question. But what I want to add to that list is humbleness. And I'll tell you why humbleness is something I learned very quickly in boxing, because it's one of the only things I ever did in my life where you could be a champion in one fight and you can get knocked out in the other, right?
Yeah.
So it really humbles you. It really humbles you. You can't really boast around saying I'm this and that, because the next one that comes along, you're probably nothing, you know? So it really does humble you. So yes, so that's one thing I'd add to that list. Um, you're going to have to repeat that question again, Niraj, sorry.
Yeah. Now, I was saying in our previous conversations and also the interview that I've come across about you, you have been a big advocate of solitude and spirituality. Could you share how these factors have contributed towards your personality as an athlete as well as an individual?
Yeah, so solitude is, I think, something a lot of people would say lockdown. It seems to be the next code word for solitude. Let me put it that way. What's the new word for solitude? It's called lockdown. So I do impose self-inflicted lockdowns. I think they're really, I do tend to thrive in self-inflicted lockdowns. I find the biggest learnings and the biggest change that happens to me really happens in moments of solitude, where there is no noise. And by noise, I mean no influences, not necessarily advice, but no influences. And I think that's what crystallizes my self belief, my courage, which then influences my action. And then doing what I want to do and excelling at what I do because that's what I want to do. And recognizing all that, the number of steps in my that's what I think really can be identified when you're away from the noise of life, of society, of negativity, positivity, whatever it is, and just locking yourself down, shutting yourself down, and listening to, I think, what most people would say, inner voice,
Yeah.
your inner belief. And I think for me, that's massive. And when you say, speaking of solitude, it's not always positive. You start to unpack a lot of negative about what you do, what you have done, what you have been, what you are, you know. But that's what shapes what you want to become and what you can be and what you will strive towards becoming. But I think the agent of change for me really comes from there.
Got it.
Yeah, so solitude is big. For me, spirituality, I think for me, spirituality is really understanding this side of it, is understanding the importance of the moment. It's the importance of understanding who you are in the moment. I think for me, that's spirituality. You know, it's just being connected to those aspects of your life, which are, to me, are real. When I say real, it's the truth. You can't really hide away from this truth.
Right.
You know, I can say what I want to say on this interview, but I can't say what I want to say when I'm by myself. That's the truth, and I can't hide away from it. And it's recognizing that, and I think for me, that only happens, not only, but that happens more strongly when I'm left alone and self-inflicted lockdown. Yeah, that's it. Is when we talk about, on the note of spirituality, I think for me, spirituality really sort of encompasses visualizing, because when you are in that solitude, you're visualizing, you're also feeling, you're unpacking the feelings that come with what you visualize. You also start to sense, you have a sense, an intuition, you start to create a really strong sense of intuition. Should I throw the sponge? Should I move this way? Should I take this pathway? Should I not train? Should I train today? Am I injured? Should I be doing an extra weight? To me, these minor things in life are really your intuition.
Yeah.
So you got to visualize. So for me, spirituality is really it really encompasses visualization, feeling, sensing, and synchronizing.
Right.
And I use synchronizing in the sense that it transfers in boxing. You know, when you're moving with your opponent, if you synchronize with your opponent, there's a lot more reading going on. You're in tune. It's like dancing. You move with the partner you're dancing with. You're synchronizing. To me, life, you need to synchronize. You need to flow. You need to synchronize with your aspects in life. So for me, that's, I don't know if that's making sense at all, but to me, that's spirituality with self. And when you synchronize with yourself, you can synchronize with people around you, including the opponent, including the teams, or sense what's wrong, or sense what's not going well, and also what's going well. But it's that combination of solitude and spirituality. That's kind of the circle I feel works together.
Yeah, and I think like this idea of solitude helping the spirituality aspect, and spirituality then allowing you to be more intuitive than you are already, and then using that to your advantage. And it need not be spirituality in a religious term, but you can also find that meditative state in boxing or any other activity that you're doing.
Absolutely, spot on. You know, I think it's cultivated. I don't know if I don't think intuition is something you're naturally born with, but I think you can cultivate it. And I think solitude, you know, reflection. I think reflection is another word for it. Sitting back, reflecting, digesting. Marinating on ideas, marinating on feelings, growing, identifying, moving, actioning, sensing, and then doing and synchronizing. That's the doing. For me, synchronizing is doing, where I'm actually putting into practice what I've ruminated on for so long, what I've identified, what I've sensed, and now I'm actually going to do it, whether it's with my opponents, whether it's with people around me, whether it's with myself in this particular environment, but just being present. And I think, you know, in the more Buddhist philosophies, I think that's really strong. And I think that resonates to me a lot. Yeah, because of these qualities. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And coming to the PhD that you're doing in trying to increase the physical activity in the population, I was keen to understand your aspirations with it and what you are trying to achieve with this work.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. So I'm currently doing my research, PhD research, on understanding the influences. What is it really influencing the physical activity and, you know, the sitting, lying, sedentary behaviors amongst an Indian population, migrants here in Australia. So I got a taste for this when I was doing my master's on Indian population in the same context in New Zealand. And I really, you know, when you do research, you look at the literature, you look at the evidence, and you find out what's going on in this population. Clearly, being an Indian myself, there is a vested interest, you know, so there's a personal interest in wanting to know and work with this population. But on a more global scale and on a more evidence-based, insight into such a topic is that this population really is very inactive, you know, and having both a personal attachment and a disease-based outcome. I'm really interested in what can I do to inform this population in living in Australia, because that's where I'm situated at the moment, to actually engage in more activity. What's influencing that? What can the Australian local governments do, or is there something that I can learn from my research to improve the quality of life, to increase their daily walking behaviors or whatever it is that you're doing culturally, because we are quite different in the way we do things like festivals and dances, and which may not always be recognized in a Western population. So it's just informing systems and policies and some implications on that. Yeah.
Right. And in terms of the future, is there any other project that we should know about apart from the PhD? Maybe back in the ring as a coach for New Zealand or India, maybe.
Oh, back in the ring as a coach. Well, I would never say no. I would never say no. You never know what opportunities come out and what is inviting at that moment and where I'm at that moment, and I might say yes or no. But in the very immediate future, I can see myself hopefully completing my PhD, making this contribution to the society, which I think is really, really important for our Indian population. And also, when it comes to boxing, I still am very involved with boxing in Australia. So I do a little bit of training, coaching of the young people here in Australia. I help out at a particular gym, a boxing gym, got my hands in there, do a little bit of work. So the love for the sport has never seemed to fade. So that's a tricky one because if it hasn't faded, there might be something there in store. Who knows? I just got to wait and see and explore my options.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking out the time today and sharing your journey with us. It is very reassuring to know that it is never too late to start your journey as an athlete, as long as you have the self belief in your own dreams and wanting to chase it down with the right kind of mindset and determination. So, thank you once again for taking out the time today, Siona, and we really appreciate you sharing your journey with us.
Thank you, Niraj. It's been an awesome, fun interview. I really enjoyed this experience. And I love the work you're doing. Once again, I really want to commend you on that. It's a great population and it's a great target audience to look at and to really inspire. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to be part of this process. So thanks so much. It's been awesome. Good luck with everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Well, that was a very inspiring conversation. It reiterates my belief in the fact that it is never too late to start your sporting career. I also loved my chat with Siona on solitude and spirituality and how she depends on it heavily to train mentally for such a gruesome sport. Finally, here's wishing Siona the best with her PhD as she tries to convey her learnings as an athlete to the masses and bring about an increase in the physical activity of the population. As promised, here's more about our partnership with Zenkai Sports, the new disruptor in the performance apparel world. Zenkai utilizes a brand new technology that repels liquids, keeping you cooler during intense activity as the sweat evaporates naturally off your skin. This allows you to regulate body temperature easily and push yourself harder as Zenkai clothing harnesses the power of your sweat. Sweat is our friend, keep it on you. Zenkai Sports is also the only performance apparel company which is cotton based. All of their gear is over 65% cotton, with some pieces over 95%. Cotton is biodegradable, feels great against your skin, and is much better for our environment than synthetic based apparel. Please go to www.zenkaisports.com to check out their cool range of products that can give you that extra boost in your performance. And while you are at it, use the code TGP20 for a 20% discount off your entire order. You can also find all these details in our show notes of this episode, so don't forget to check it out. So that's it for this episode, folks. Thank you for tuning into the Gifted Podcast. I have been your host, Niraj Mulani. A gentle reminder, you can find us as The Gifted on your favorite podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, and Google. Keep following us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as The Gifted Podcast and on Twitter as The Gifted Pod so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Thank you once again for listening, and I'll see you next week with another special episode. Until then, stay well and keep your masks on.